Welcome back for another episode of the Beyond Body podcast. I'm your host, Mia Findlay, an eating disorder survivor, advocate, and recovery coach. And this podcast is all about motivating, inspiring, and most importantly, getting real about mental health. As always, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I am seated and recording today, the Gadigal people. I send my respect to all elders and ancestors and any First Nations people listening. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Very excited to bring you this episode. I kind of got lost in the editing process because I forgot what I was doing and just was listening to the episode because it is a really personal, vulnerable, beautiful episode. I was so lucky to be joined by one of our extraordinary coaches at Beyond Body, Holly Sunday. Holly is a superstar coach. She is the co-host of the Beyond Body retreats with me. She's actually a former client of mine who is now recovered, fully certified, and making such an enormous impact on every single one of her clients. So we wanted to talk about a topic which we each really value, which is connection in recovery, how eating disorders can rob us of connection, really take away from our connection to ourselves, to our people, and most importantly, how that can change through the recovery process. So there's some really amazing skills and tools that we share with you throughout this episode, but it also is very, very vulnerable in terms of what we share in relation to our own friendships, relationships, and how they were affected by our eating disorders and subsequently our recovery. So enjoy the episode. Let us know your thoughts as always, and I'll see you soon. Holly, thank you so much for being on the Beyond Body podcast today. I'm so happy to have you with me, not only because I just love a catch up with you, but because we're talking about a topic we're both very, very passionate about. Before we jump into connection in recovery, can you introduce yourself to our audience, who you are, why you got into recovery coaching? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Hi, Mia. Hi, audience. Thanks for having me. So my name is Holly Sunday, and I am one of Mia's Beyond Body CCI certified recovery coaches. I've been a recovery coach for getting up to a year now, and I fell into coaching because I actually had a coach. The fabulous Mia was my coach. So I obviously recovered from an eating disorder. I had done a lot of the recovery things, really been through the works like so many of us had, but I was sort of towards the end and just knew there was still a handful of behavioral things I really needed some additional support with. And then I found a coach. This worked for me so much because I had someone on the other end of the screen holding me accountable to all the little nitty-gritty things that I wasn't quite ready to let go of until I had someone really in my face being like, you actually have no option. We need to let go of these. So I think because I had such a positive experience with coaching, it very much is something that I thought I could be good at. And I think having seen how much impact it made in my own life, like how rewarding to be able to give that impact to other people.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where we're at now.
Beautiful. And you are a phenomenal coach. The passion for the work comes through, but also just the day-to-day progress of your clients. You absolutely found your calling, and it's a very, very cool full circle moment to have you as part of our team. So yeah, we feel very, very fortunate to have you. So we were bouncing around some ideas in terms of what we could cover and talk about in this episode today, and connection really came through as a really key point that we both wanted to cover. So to jump into just the general topic of connection, what does connection mean to you? How do you define it? How does that word kind of resonate with you?
Yeah, so I think connection and the role it plays in our modern lives is obviously super subjective to every individual. But to me at the moment, when I think about it, I feel like connection is really this primary element that just actually helps me remain grounded on a daily basis through my life. So it really is the feeling I get when I am making decisions every day that are in alignment with my values, who I am, what I care about. I mean, it's kind of hard to give it a exact definition because it's kind of everything, right? Like whether or not you're in recovery, I think connection is really the reminder that we're not just on this earth to pay taxes and die. Like we're actually here to like feel and experience our lives on more than just the surface level. So I think that connection, particularly authentic connection, and this is just my understanding of it, is something that really starts within and then extends to the people who come into our world and then make us feel something.
Completely. I love that, because how do we know that the people that we're connecting to are meant for us unless we know who we are first and foremost? We got to figure out what this side of the magnet is before we go attracting what is meant for us, right? I totally agree. I also, when I think of the word connection, I think these days, and we'll get into my other experiences with this, I think of connection as like safety. It's like backup. That when you have the opportunity to do the inner work and get to know yourself, and you become your best advocate and your first port of call in terms of, I've got to check in with my instinct, I've got to check in with how I'm feeling and what feels right for me. In moments of doubt where you don't have that strong message coming through, to have those trusted people to go and bounce some of that data off, and knowing that you trust their intuition means that you can then take a little bit of pressure off yourself to have the answers all the time, right? That you are allowed to have doubt, and that's where your people come in and tether you back to your values and tether you back to your mission or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think if you don't have that sort of very foundational starting point, sure, there can be connection. I'm sure everyone has some form of connection, but is it authentic? Because I think there's a huge difference. And I think if you have connection that isn't authentic, that's when it's so easy for feelings of sort of like aloneness or isolation can come up. Because it might look like on the surface, right, that I have friends and I'm connecting, but if you're not really connecting to yourself first, a lot of the time, the intentions for the connections can come from these places that aren't probably very aligned, particularly if you have an eating disorder. You know, your reasons for wanting to connect with people could sort of be in that kind of category of needing validation or needing reassurance.
I love that point. That is, I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, absolutely. That, you know, whether it's healthy self or eating disorder self leading the connection, that's what's going to come back the other way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's sort of like you can choose either have authentic or deceptive connection, right? And communication in there as well. I think, you know, if I sort of reflect on the role in which connection played in my eating disorder versus my recovery and sort of where I am now, obviously there is a huge difference, because I think when I reflect on it, authentic connection to myself was really, really limited when I was unwell, because how could I possibly be showing up as the truest version of myself when I was actually living in secret and experiencing so much deep self-doubt? And I think when I was unwell, as so many of us do, I really tried to manage that self-doubt by, you know, changing how I looked in hope that it would fix all my internal struggles. Obviously it didn't. So I think for a long time, what I thought I needed and wanted really was that external validation and recognition, right? But what I actually truly craved was actually a deep sense of connection to myself. But I didn't know that at the time. And I think the more energy I gave to my eating disorder, the further away I got from that deeper desire of actual true connection.
Yeah. Connection felt very threatening to me in my eating disorder, because it obviously meant that I was more exposed. And like you said, so much of this is secretive in terms of our behaviors, in terms of our patterns, in terms of how we treat ourselves. But it was also threatening in that it held up a mirror to how I was treating myself and speaking to myself. If you have people who treat you well and think you're funny and kind and just love you and care for you just because, not because you're trying to earn it or trying to prove your worth, like we do every day in the eating disorder mindset. I can prove today that I'm worthy. I can prove today that I am lovable or valuable or whatever it might be. Whereas the people who really love you, there is no tiered system of, you know, you need to earn this love and care and sense of belonging. For that to be incongruent, to be really faced with people who valued me and demonstrated how they valued me, and for me to not be able to believe any of it, was so uncomfortable that hiding myself away and isolating was the less painful option, which then once it's got you in isolation, you're in trouble. But yeah, connection with other people felt very, very uncomfortable, buzzing with anxiety. Being around people, I was just full of anxiety constantly, because I think of that kind of cognitive dissonance of, well, hang on, how come people are telling me that I'm good and valuable and loved, but none of it feels like it can connect? It felt like I was just made of Teflon. Anything positive that came in just had the slightest moment of impact and then slid right off. And so I'd need more and more and more and more of it. Some of that validation farming you're talking about, even if it was just in tiny increments, if I could gather enough of that up, then maybe I would really feel it. But if bad stuff came in, oh, have I got a place for you to live forever? Come on in. Bad, opinions and bad, inauthentic connection, that really felt like it had a home because I recognized it. It was what I was telling myself every day.
Oh my gosh, you're so spot on there. And I think the difference is sort of when those like negative thing comes, we're no longer Teflon, like we're Velcro. You're like, yep, we're very much sticking, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think sort of one of the things I take from that is that you really need a level of vulnerability to be able to actually have authentic connection. But I know when I was struggling, I didn't know how to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to let my walls down. And frankly, I had no desire to, right? Which puts so many limitations on the depth at which my emotional relationships could actually get to.
Yeah.
When I actually went into recovery, I was in a relationship at the time. So, in my world, for a bit of context, like I thought I was kind of holding this together and like somewhat withstanding this internal storm, wasn't, knew there was something seriously wrong, but was still sort of in that denial phase of being like, I reckon I could read a few like self-help books and like kind of figure this out on my own.
I'm just one podcast away from enlightenment.
It's going to like take no time at all. It's just like an afternoon. And then I was on a camping trip with my partner at the time. And for no, from his perspective, for no apparent reason, I just broke down into tears because I was just in this world of like pain and stress and overwhelm, but still felt like I had to show up with this like BS facade that like everything was okay and I was creating this level of really inauthentic connection. And it wasn't until that moment that he actually said to me, look, Cole, I know something really big is going on and I don't know what it is, but we can't continue our relationship and we can't connect further if you're not going to be honest with yourself about what's going on and then be honest with me. And I think this conversation just cut through what I thought was this big secret that I was hiding. And I also think when I reflect on this conversation, and also in hindsight, like how wise and awesome of this like ex-partner of mine. Like,
I was going to say, like, that's
really solid.
I don't know how it ended, but I mean, he gets points for that at least.
It ended well. We're really good friends.
Good.
But I think, from that moment, that was the first time I actually was really able to engage with and actually recognize my healthy self, because it was sort of this voice saying to me, like, this is actually your opportunity.
Yeah.
You do not feel ready and you're honestly never going to feel ready. But all I did know was that this was no longer just affecting me. It was actually affecting everyone around me and my relationships. So I had to make a choice there. So I think the desire for authentic connection there was one of the main things that actually pushed me into recovery. And I think, from there, obviously everything really dramatically changed. And I started, the journey of stripping back these layers and slowly working towards a more honest, messy, raw, but deeply true connection with myself. And then I think, because when you're in recovery, right, you are learning to connect and reconnect in so many ways. And I think that's with your healthy self, as well as with your body, as well as just generally with the process of recovery. So I think it kind of comes back to, right, the ability to internally connect with ourselves first is the primary thing that actually will support authentic external connections. Because if you don't believe in yourself, you're probably not going to show up as yourself, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like if you do believe in yourself, like you have nothing to hide.
Yeah. And then what are you attracting as a result of that? I love that conversation that you had with your ex-partner, because I had similar kind of conversations, maybe not as sort of hard hitting as that. But I remember when I was becoming quite chronic, I was living very briefly with my oldest and best girlfriend, Josie, who in fact, literally in an apartment that I can see now from my new apartment, where she lived since she was 5, and we've known each other for 30 years. And because we lived together, even though it was so brief, she picked up very quickly on stuff that I was doing that I'd never done before, my level of anxiety, how unbelievably preoccupied I was with my appearance and my body. She obviously was noticing changes in terms of how I ate and my body itself, and she would really call me out on it. She would say, you know, something's going on here. But we were in our early 20s. We weren't even 25 yet. And so our ability maybe to have that conversation wasn't super productive, but it is one of those very clear moments in a long stretch of time that I don't remember very well, as many of us don't in our eating disorder, because because we're not obviously cognitively where we'd ideally like to be. But I remember that because it was such an expression of tough love, but really came from love. And at the time, it made me resent her. It made me really move away from the friendship, one of the most important central relationships in my life. And as a result of my eating disorder, we didn't speak for about 2 or 3 years. And not because it led to any big blow up. We didn't have some fight that was specifically about some action someone took or something someone said. It was because she didn't know me anymore. She didn't recognize me anymore. And this had been her best friend at that point of 18 years. And suddenly she just didn't know who I was. And it's interesting because then over the following years, the friendships that I attracted and focused on were friendships that ordinarily I probably wouldn't have attracted. Very kind of surface level friendships. And I was still looking for that depth of connection, but was in absolutely no position to be able to engage with people in that way. And when I got better, one of the first relationships to repair was my relationship with Josie. So it's really interesting to see, you know, how that, you know, sense of self that you're talking about, how profoundly different your life is going to be depending on how your relationship is with yourself first and foremost, because we are, I do believe this, I know people can interpret this saying in different ways, negative and positive, but you are a reflection of the people around you, and your life is going to be dictated therefore in part by the people you surround yourself with. So the importance of connection, generally speaking, but particularly through the recovery process, as something to explore and pay attention to. Who are you surrounded by? What are your values? What do you want to get out of your relationships? And what you're seeing in your connections, is that actually reflecting the direction that you want to head in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there has to be this really strong level of introspection to have some of these harder conversations with yourself, but also, you know, in saying that, it's not just as simple as being like, all right, so I have not been connecting authentically, and now I really want to flip the switch and be able to do that. Because, you know, I think when you take the step to want to work towards showing up as, you know, the most open and true version of yourself, you kind of have to realize that you were probably adjusting yourself to fit into the world. So that actually means learning to be okay, maybe not being liked by everyone.
Totally.
And it's like, then kind of comes up these like sticky feelings of like fear of rejection and all these things we try to avoid as well. I think a girlfriend once said the best analogy to me ever. I feel like you will love this.
Great. You know, I love a metaphor.
And she was like, I think one day I was just like in this like pool of self-doubt or pity or something. And she said to me, she was like, you know what, Hol, you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but you are an English breakfast, so you will be most people's cup of tea. And I was like, I'll take it.
And then you're just going to have those peppermint fans who are just never, ever, ever going to go for it. It's so true.
Okay.
It's so true. And you know, it's so interesting. Before my eating disorder, even as a teenager, I genuinely didn't care if people liked me. I was never someone who really gravitated towards being in groups or, you know, that sort of thing. If I was friends with you, I was friends with you. That was sort of, I didn't really have a need to be part of like a, you know, solid pack or something like that. Right. If we connected, and that was great. If I had an opinion, I always felt comfortable sharing it, maybe too comfortable if you were to ask my teachers, my principal, especially in year 12, when I chose to write an 18-page letter to the HSC board about what I thought was wrong with the HSC system. instead of writing my exam, and they almost took my HSC away. So I never had any problem expressing my opinion, not being liked. I, was always quite like too probably intensely justice minded. If I thought something was wrong, I would say it, and then made that my career for the last 10 years. But for the period of my illness, I had no personality. I wanted to be so, and I mean this genuinely, I wanted to be so beige that I would be as acceptable to everyone as possible, because my sense of self was so fragile and I was so filled with self-hatred. I couldn't handle the idea of somebody validating what I already believed so intensely about myself. I would go out with my girlfriends and we would like meet people for the first time, like a bunch of guys, coming up to a bunch of girls and they would speak to me for 2 minutes and then they would just sort of turn their heads, and I just didn't understand. I was like, but look, I'm doing everything I can to be so acceptable and so appealing and so, so in need of your validation. And they picked up on that. It was like, there was no one home. This is a Stepford wife. I can get about 3 minutes of conversation out of her, and then she's literally just there to mirror whatever they thought was good or cool or right or whatever it might be. So I always find that quite interesting about eating disorders, is that this party line that they push of, I can make you acceptable, I can make you lovable, I can make you palatable for everyone. And then that validation and that care and love from people is going to fill the void that you have. And all it does is actually perpetuate behaviors, and for you to come across in a way where people are like, I don't really know what's here. I'm not picking up on, like you say, that authentic self, right? And yet we are constantly trying to pursue these ideals and these rules and these patterns, which are going to lead to us being accepted. And we just perpetuate that isolation more and more and more and more and more until we're totally removed. As I got to the point where I had no friends, no family around me, no job. I was completely disconnected from everyone. And one of my major motivators for pursuing how eating disorder told me I could be worthy was because I so desperately wanted to belong. I so desperately wanted to have people around me. I so desperately wanted to be loved and cared for. And that's what I was trying to demonstrate. That's who I was trying to be. And the more I leaned into it, the further away I got, and I didn't see it. I really didn't see those ropes that led back to my people just being severed systematically for years and years until they were all gone.
I think that is just such a beautiful story, because I feel like my experience prior to my eating disorder is so opposing to that. Because I know when I was in high school, when I was younger, like, sure as hell I wanted to be liked. Like, I wanted to be one of these popular girls. Like, I didn't have a strong sense of self. I was probably like throwing myself left, right, and center, being like the biggest people pleaser ever. So because I don't think I had that, I mean, I've always been Holly, like I've always had my own little sparkle, but I didn't have a strong sense of self then. So, for this reason, it's not super surprising that I fell into having an eating disorder, because I was seeking something that would give me that sense of self. And, for that cross-section of my life, I thought the eating disorder was going to be that. Again, we realize all these things in hindsight. So I think why my recovery was so important to me, because it was so much more than just healing my relationship with food. It actually, the way I would describe it was that it was like a homecoming to a part of myself that I had actually never experienced, because I wasn't trying to get back to this person that I knew I was when I was like a joyous teenager. I didn't yet know who I was. And maybe I was on the journey to figuring that out. And then the eating disorder was this like massive roadblock for like X amount of years of me getting there. But recovery was the thing that pulled me back into the place of being like, I actually distinctly remember the day. I was like sitting in my mum's backyard reading, I think, this beautiful book, and it's called Eating in the Light of the Moon.
Oh yeah,
it's
beautiful.
So beautiful. And I remember having the realization of being like, my recovery is not just about food. Like, it's actually about me understanding who I am. And this is the experience, for whatever reason, I've had to go through to get to that place. So I think it's the most beautiful experience of homecoming, the whole journey of recovery. But to do that, we so often have to feel some of those some of the hardest human emotions to feel, right? Like shame or disgust or embarrassment or pain, some of these really like difficult things that, make an eating disorder so isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, which promotes even more sort of disconnection because, yeah, I'm sure it's easy to connect with some of the more positive feelings of excitement and happiness and contentment, but for the most part, you're not getting any of that in eating disorder world. So those heavy emotions that do promote those feelings of isolation that we're talking about, because that isolation feels safe, right? And it feels easy to retreat. And this is really appealing to the eating disorder. And when I stepped into recovery, I didn't have anyone in my inner circle, and I didn't know of anyone who had been through or was going through recovery. And that brought up such a deep loneliness, because I think I felt lonely before I went into recovery, but for a totally different reason. Now I felt like, I could speak to my team or my partner sometimes, or maybe my family, but I didn't feel understood on this deep level, like I was still craving. But that's also partially because I didn't completely understand my own situation yet. So I think this is why coaches are such advocates for supporting through lived experience, because having connection with someone that really understands your experience and really gets the nuances of your internal struggle in a personal, not just intellectual way is so, so humanizing. And I feel like that was very much my experience through recovery with you being my coach, being like, people have actually felt how I'm feeling, this like experience that feels so isolating and just so like solo. I just feel like I have this bubble around me and no one else is ever going to be able to understand it and support me through this. How I was very wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I went into recovery totally alone. In terms of just the landscape of my life at that time. It was one of the reasons why I went into recovery. It was a huge contributor to how my mental health had just plummeted and bottomed out and had never been worse. Also because, you just don't have anybody there to hold up the mirror to say things are getting really bad. And that's why it is so advantageous to the eating disorder to systematically sever the ties that you have to the people who can keep you anchored. Because if it has you isolated, you don't have anyone there as a checks and balances system to go, what's going on? Like my girlfriend did within the first 2 or 3 years of my eating disorder, was the only person to look me in the eye and say, what is going on? And again, that, like I said, really pushed me to isolate myself from her, because what would have happened to me if, that had continued to have been pursued, right? I might have got help sooner. I wouldn't have needed the eating disorder. So it's absolutely benefited by any level of isolation, and it will isolate you to the point where there is no connection left, right? So that's so much of what connection can do for people in recovery. And like you say, with coaches, so much of our job is to hold a very truthful mirror up and say, this is what is actually going on, right? This might be what eating disorder self is telling you every day, and, keeping you lost in that internal chatter and normalizing this stuff for you. But hey, like, here's the reality of what's going on. And that's what true connection should be. I really believe that the best measure of someone who cares about you is someone who can support you and validate you, and also be brutally truthful with you. They are the kind of friendships that I want and have in my life, who tell me when I'm dead right and when I am dead wrong. And that kind of truth is terrifying to an eating disorder. I know that this can maybe be a tenuous connection, but I do like the connection that Carolyn makes between how your eating disorder isolates you and the way that people get isolated in abusive relationships, because it's that very function that eating disorder is using. If you don't have your people to bounce how you're talking to yourself or how someone's treating you off them to go, is this acceptable? Is this okay? Especially when it's been getting increasingly worse over a period of time. You're a frog in hot water. You may not be able to see the red flags of your behavior or someone else's behavior as it comes up. Your loved ones will. And if you have those authentic relationships, they are going to tell you. So I think that, like I said, as much as that can be a bit of a tenuous connection, I think it is apt as far as eating disorders, really mimicking that isolating nature of abusive relationships.
I agree with that so much. And, I think it does get tricky sometimes with, people have been struggling with their eating disorder for a long time. Like you were saying, a lot of those strong connections have been severed or have become a lot weaker. You sort of have to go through this journey of being able to seek connection from this place that isn't trying to fill that void.
Mm-hmm.
But if you already, because if you're trying to receive validation rather than seeking connections to actually expand your already established connection with yourself, a lot of the time they're going to be really surface level or sort of reach a roadblock where you don't want to connect further because you're not yet connecting with yourself, right? Like I feel like the depth at which you can connect in a relationship is kind of going to be like a direct mirror to the amount in which you can connect with yourself, right? Like what's that saying? It's like you can only love someone the same amount that you love yourself.
Yeah.
Which I think is just so beautiful. I think, the biggest shift for me about, if I think about what recovery taught me about connection and friendship was that I actually, no longer wanted to be liked, kind of like you when you were that younger version of yourself. But I now really wanted to be seen and to also be able to give others the feeling of being totally and completely seen and appreciated for everything that they are. Because I think the recovered version of myself also required me to be okay letting people go instead of proving my worth to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that being prepared to not be, especially as a woman. I was watching an interview between Ellen Pompeo and Katherine Heigl. They were in Grey's Anatomy. They interviewed each other for, I think it was The Hollywood Reporter. And Ellen Pompeo said, as a woman, you get two roles, victim or villain, because it's hard to not be liked. I've been saying many things on the internet for 10 years that people haven't liked me for. I've stood up for things that I believe are wrong, that the majority think is just fine. Back when I was criticizing bikini body challenges and everyone was like, what are you talking about? And now we can all see what a horror show that was 10 years later. So being able to, whether it's on that level or personally, to prepare for the gift that it is to not be liked by everybody, because I think if you've been through an eating disorder and you've tried to make yourself as palatable to everyone as possible, you know how hollow that feeling is. It is a privilege to have a select few. It is a privilege to have, a handful of your people and know that they were meant for you, versus trying to cram yourself into a mold of who you think you should be, and then potentially missing the people who are meant for that. When I had that realization in recovery, that terrified me, that because I was performing who I thought I should be, how many people who were meant for me were walking right past me. That terrified me, that in all the time that I was trying to, make myself as acceptable to as many people as possible, how many opportunities to have a genuine moment with somebody did I miss? How many deeper friendships did I miss?
Wow.
And I still think about that to this day. It's a kind of when I think back on the people I was connecting to and attracting, I'm like, if I met them now, I would be like, just keep walking.
Right. That terrifies me now.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Like, oh my
Sorry,
God,
everybody.
me that I didn't see. I missed meeting my best friend. I think, look, when I started healing and going on this journey to learning to love myself, my taste in friends shifted because recovery taught me how to value myself. And now I was in a place where I knew I would be upholding that self-value. And that was obviously through the decisions I was making myself on a daily basis, but also who I wanted to share my world with and share my time with. And now I would probably say, being in my late 20s, I think my friendships are one of my best qualities. If 100%. I can consider that a personal quality.
You take credit for your picker. Like, I've got a great friend picker. I've got a good people selector. I totally agree. My greatest moments of joy, especially since recovering, have all been because of the people in my life. Like I feel so fortunate that, I went into recovery when I was 25. My dad died when I was 32. And because of my eating disorder, like the rest of my family, I had drifted so far from him. Because again, like with Josie, he didn't recognize me. He knew me as this really like feisty, opinionated, like funny, silly kid. And I just became a person he didn't know anymore. We had so much in common philosophically and politically. And, you know, in the years that he was living in America before he died, we spoke every day on Skype, especially when Trump got elected. We just weren't having any depth to our conversations or our relationship at all. And then I went over to America to go to a friend's wedding when I was like 28, and Dad was living in Massachusetts, and he came and picked me up, and I went and stayed with him for 10 days. And it was like, it was like what you said with a homecoming, because obviously he was like my home because he was one of my parents. It was like a homecoming, and I could see in his eyes, he like recognized me. I could see him seeing me come back for the first time to him in a long time. So yeah, just being able to have that depth of connection and level of connection post recovery is one of the most joyful sources of love and happiness and purpose. And in what we do, right? That's what we do. That's our bread and butter, is connection, is connecting to that healthy part of somebody and validating that part and supporting and empowering that part. And my career and my job brings me a lot of joy. So that is more than anything that I have been able to achieve since being recovered. It is connection that has brought me that true, oh my God, I wouldn't be anywhere else right now. I am exactly where I'm meant to be, exactly who I'm meant to be with, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I agree with that, like, wholeheartedly, because I think, you know, when you know yourself, your relationships thrive because you're able to attract those like-minded humans with authenticity, not fear. I think, yeah, I agree. Our friendships and just relationships are the place where we experience so much joy in this lifetime. And some of my most beautiful memories of my 20s are just laughing with friends who, for that cross-section of my life, they were my chosen family. And for whatever reason, you know, we meant something to each other. And I think some friends will stay around for a lifetime. And I feel so blessed to have a collection of those kind of people in my world. But there will also be friendships that you will encounter that, you know, for whatever reason, won't go the distance.
Yes.
And that's okay. You know, because I don't think it actually makes them any less important. Because I think if someone's existence meant something to you, that is still a gift to be treasured, you know. And I'm not sure if it's just like who I am as a person or because I've gone through a big mental health journey, but maybe that has influenced me being just such a particularly self-reflective and just sentimental person. But I don't take it lightly when someone makes an impact in my life, because life is a lot for a lot of people a lot of the time. And I feel like good friends and strong relationships are like respite that just like cut through the heaviness of life, where you can just be like seen and accepted in all of your beauty and all of your mess and like all of the chaos in between everything. And I feel like that kind of connection is honestly just the best thing in the world. And it is so worth the journey to understand yourself better so that you can more authentically just connect with your world.
I totally agree. So do you notice a lack of connection coming up with your clients in a similar way to what you experienced or what we've talked about today? Because I don't think there's a single client where it hasn't come up at some point. So what have you noticed in terms of your client work and how connection surfaces?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, I would be so taken back if a client came up to me and said, "Hey, Holly, like I'm feeling super connected to myself and my community in like a really authentic way all the time." Like it's just not going to happen. I think if someone did that, I'd be like,
and I feel so loved and I feel so validated and
why are we here?
And I'm worthy. And it's like, can you bottle that up? Can we sell that?
Totally. I think there's a couple pieces to this that are really important to speak to. So what I really notice is the lack of connection to community, but often and probably always really it does come tied in with that lack of connection to themselves. And I think when you have a lack of connection to yourself, it makes it harder for clients to actually foster a strong connection to their why. Like, why am I on this journey in the first place? Because I think when recovery gets tough, as it does a lot of the time, it's not a sense of like grit and willpower that get you through. It's a sense of connection to
Yes.
knowing where you're going and why. I think,
Mm-hmm.
like, why is this important? Why does this matter? This is one of, the reasons I'm such a strong advocate for this real, like, purpose-driven recovery, which is, about so much more than just the removal of the eating disorder symptoms, but rather
Yeah.
using that self-discovery offered by recovery as this tool to strengthen your own sense of self, and then that connection being this like guiding force for the positive direction of full recovery. Because
Yes.
when you can't connect to your why, well, actually no, when you can connect to your why, it's going to be a lot easier to realize that every little decision that you are making through your day matters, and they all
Yes.
are getting you a little bit closer to who you're going to be at the end of this. And
Mm-hmm.
in my case, it was very much in hindsight that I realized that a lot of these small decisions I was making every day actually end up being the big decisions. So
Mm-hmm.
what I witness in clients is that when they are able to more consistently connect to their why through their healthy self, through aligned action, this develops that foundational anchor to their internal world. And with that clarity, it becomes so much easier to see where else disconnection lies. And
Yeah.
often that will be in this relational sense to their external world. So when clients are experiencing a lack of connection, often, like we were saying before, there is some connection, but it may not be authentic. So
Yeah.
when clients feel ready to have a healthy desire to expand their external circles, and whether or not that be, connecting to a recovery community or working to improve relationships they already have or seeking new friendship or romance, it doesn't really matter. What we establish first is, what is the intention for this connection?
Mm.
Because we want to be really clear on, is this desire for connection coming from your eating disorder self, or is it actually coming from your healthy self?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you can get really clear on, ideally, how would you like to show up for this connection? Because it's not just as if this person's going to offer something to you. Like, what are you also going to
Yeah.
offer them? Like, that is really what connection is as well. So, like, what are your needs? What are your boundaries? What are your desires? I think I feel so proud of clients when they take the bold steps to really expand their circles, because it takes so much bravery and a lot of discomfort, but it really is that good kind of discomfort that you are really stepping out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself to grow. And I think when you're doing a lot of the food behavioral work in eating disorder recovery, like, you're really working to strengthen this distress tolerance, right? And then you can use that ability to sit in discomfort in these other expansive ways, like expanding your community, connecting with new people. It's still discomfort. And
Mm.
you've practiced this many, many times. So you can now use it in this new environment. Because realistically, like, adult friendships can be really difficult sometimes. It's
Yeah.
not like you have this schoolyard of like 200 people that are your potential friends.
Yeah.
Like, you actually have
Life
to
gets
like
complicated.
put in a lot of effort
Yeah,
to make friends
absolutely.
as an adult.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love what you said about, this can all, as much as connection is joyful and wonderful, going and seeking it out when you've been isolated for so long with something that tells you that you're worthless and no one's going to like you and no one's going to love you and no one's going to accept you, to go out and intentionally make yourself gather the evidence to say that that's not true is potentially really painful, right? Because you're sitting on the knife's edge of, well, I don't know, because I've lost that genuine connection for so long. I don't have the evidence to say that people will love me just because and accept me just because. So like everything we do, going and gathering evidence that our beliefs about food might be wrong and movement might be wrong and our body image might be wrong, we have to do it with all of this much deeper personal stuff as well, right? And it's also, I mean, it's no surprise that in the 8 Keys books that chapter 7 is all about help seeking, aka connection, because it is so integral, not just to the recovery process, but being a human. We are pack animals. We are meant to be together. We are meant to help each other. It's how we used to survive. If you got left behind by the pack, you didn't survive. And obviously that's taken on a little bit more of a modern twist these days, where it is more so about our mental health and our sense of belonging, as opposed to like being left during the migrating periods of whatever you were doing as a caveman, right? But some of the work that I really enjoy doing with clients is looking at their support system and their help seeking as a skill and looking at it through a really intentional lens. And something that I'll get them to do, which could be a helpful takeaway for people listening, is I'll get them to do what I call the help seeking mosaic or the support system mosaic. And I get them first and foremost to write out a list of absolutely everyone who is currently in their orbit, family, friends, co-workers, whomever it might be, pets. Lola's definitely on my list. She's in the comfort category. Get them to write down all these people and all these different categories that they live in their life. Write down, what are these people's strengths in terms of their attributes? Are they someone who's really comforting? Are they validating and affirming? Are they good at distracting you? Do they get you out of your comfort zone when you're getting into a bit of a rut and you're isolating yourself? Are they someone who will give you hard truths? Are they somebody who will be a shoulder to cry on, or somebody who's really going to put a mirror up and say, okay, what's really going on here? And then to list out, what are your common patterns and areas where you might need help that you see arising? And then how can we start connecting some of these areas of strength of the people in your support system and what your needs are, whether they're recovery needs or general life stressor needs, and then to very intentionally match those up. Because if we are letting things get to the point of crisis, as tends to happen when we're isolated because our eating disorders have taken us away from everybody, by the time we hit crisis, we're just screaming for help, any kind of help to anyone who will listen. And that may mean that we are reaching out to somebody who is not maybe the appropriate person to reach out to, or we may be unable at that point to communicate exactly what our needs are. So helping people to see connection and help seeking as a proactive thing they need to work on versus reactive. I'll wait for everything to fall apart and then I'll just wave the flag and hope to God somebody sees me and comes and plucks me out of the rip, as opposed to getting to know yourself, knowing where your red flags are and your patterns, know those more intimately so you can see where you need intervention and you need help, and then really reminding yourself of who's sitting in that mosaic, where and how can they show up, and intentionally matching those two categories.
Yeah. What I take from that is it's so good to have the visual representation, because so often I think we feel like we might have one or two people and then like they have this really big responsibility to like hold all this stuff of ours. It's like no one person can be everything for you. And whether particularly, that responsibility will often fall onto like an intimate partner, which I feel like was probably my experience. And like, that's not fair on them. It's not really fair on you. So I think as you are learning to reconnect in this authentic, healthy way, you're also learning how to be a conscious communicator. And how do you actually want to show up in friendships and romances and even with your family dynamics? Like, what does that actually look like for you? I think learning to be able to do that is such a like powerful skill. And then being able to have friends, like you were saying, that like kind of call you out when you're like maybe not being a very good friend. I know for sure, like my best friend, we call each other out on stuff 100%,
100%.
And she will also be the person, like we'll call each other and, preface the conversation by saying, hey, are you in a place to hear this? Do you mind if I project for about 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Just like absolutely alone, be like, am I being dramatic? Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the look. I know Joe. I'm like mid rant and Josie's just looking at me and I'm like, oh shit, I know what's coming. She's going to go, look, I hear all of that. But do you remember how you text him this? And maybe that's why I'm like, I don't want to talk about that bit, Josie. I just want you to validate my bad behavior. And she's like, yeah, but I mean, I'm looking at the whole picture here.
We're just going to zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
You're being a little bit psycho.
Yeah. Yeah, she's got all the secrets. She's the vault. I'll send her voice messages being like, if you ever wanted to expose me, you could ruin my whole life. All right, fabulous. I think this has been beautiful, just in terms of, what we've personally shared and some of that reflection on what might help to motivate people to continue in their recovery or embark on recovery if they've noticed themselves that joy and that connection has gone out of their lives. And also I want to remind people that, recovery can be eating disorders can be really, really destructive to relationships. And I think that can be a real area of grief for people. I have clients who feel like they've lost friendships. Those friendships aren't necessarily lost. They might just be on pause while they wait for you to come back. But I know that is a really painful grief point for people. So if you're sitting and saying, well, I've lost everyone, so this doesn't apply to me, let people surprise you. Work on you, work on, as Holly's saying, like that important connection to yourself, and know that as a result of that, a lot of these relationships can be revived. I experienced it. I've seen a lot of other people experience it. And you may get to the point where some of those relationships you can acknowledge didn't need to be revived. So it can be a gift for you in that way as well.
What's that saying that like every mum says all the time? It's like people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Yeah. Like I was saying before, it doesn't really matter.
Put it up in like lettering in stencil on a wall.
On the top of the mosaic.
Yeah. Right next to live, laugh, love.
I mean, whatever gets you through recovery.
No. Okay. Thank you so much for this, Holly. This was amazing. I know that people are going to get so much out of it. I know that we're going to be seeing your face and hearing your voice again. That's sort of in the works. We'll just let people see that happen as it rolls out. Where can people come and find you and support you?
So, I mean, you can come and find me on the Beyond Body website. I'm on there, but I also have my own recovery practice called Hi Beautiful. So you can find me at hibeautiful.com.au, or you can also find me on Instagram at, is it hi.beautiful? And then I think there's 4 underscores. It's actually a little bit tricky to find.
Come to my list of who I'm following. I'm only following about 100 people, and put in hi and you'll get up.
Yeah. You need 20 minutes.
Yeah. Like a forensic path into your Instagram.
Keep them guessing.
I love it. Thank you so much.